The whispers started the moment Katherine Parker stepped into Sullivan's general store. A widow of 3 years at the age of 38, she'd grown accustomed to the sideways glances and hushed conversations that seemed to follow her through the dusty streets of Promise Creek, Colorado. The year was 1878, and in this frontier town, a woman her age without a husband might as well have been wearing a scarlet letter. Katherine kept her head high as she placed her basket on the counter, carefully selecting the items she needed for the week ahead. Her honey-brown hair was neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet, a few stubborn strands framing a face that still held beauty, though marked by lines of both laughter and sorrow. She'd been married for 17 years to Thomas Parker before consumption had taken him, leaving her with their small ranch to manage alone. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan," Katherine said with practiced politeness to the shopkeeper's wife, ignoring the two women whispering by the fabric bolts. "Morning, Mrs. Parker," Edith Sullivan replied, her eyes darting nervously to the gossiping women before returning to Katherine. "Just the usual today." "Yes, and perhaps some of that new ribbon you've got in. The blue one would make a nice trim for my Sunday dress." The bell above the door jingled, and the store fell momentarily silent as Vaughn Vance stepped through the doorway. At 32, he cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges beneath his well-worn hat, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. Vaughn had arrived in Promise Creek only 6 months prior, taking over as foreman at the Rockingham Ranch outside of town. He nodded politely to Mrs. Sullivan before his gaze settled on Katherine. Something in his expression softened, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "Mrs. Parker," he said, tipping his hat. "Fine day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is, Mr. Vance," Katherine replied, feeling an unwelcome warmth rise to her cheeks. She quickly turned her attention back to Mrs. Sullivan. "Just these items, please." The whispering from the corner grew louder, and Katherine couldn't help but catch a fragment of their conversation. Too old to be making eyes at the new foreman. Should act her age. Practically ancient. Katherine's fingers tightened around her purse, knuckles whitening with the effort to maintain her composure. She'd endured worse, but somehow, with Vaughn standing just feet away, the words stung more sharply than usual. Vaughn's jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath the stubble. Without hesitation, he stepped closer to the counter, his voice carrying clearly through the small store. "Mrs. Parker," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "would you allow me to escort you home with your purchases? It's on my way, and I'd appreciate the company." Before Katherine could respond, one of the gossiping women, Mabel Winters, the banker's wife, let out a derisive snort. "Mr. Vance, surely a young man like yourself has better things to do than escort a woman of certain years." The store went deadly quiet. Katherine felt her chest tighten, humiliation burning in her throat. Vaughn turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on Mabel. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an edge that sent a shiver down Katherine's spine. "Age is just a number, Mrs. Winters. And if you ask me, Mrs. Parker is timeless." He turned back to Katherine, extending his arm. "Shall we?" Something shifted in Katherine's heart at that moment, a crack in the walls she'd built around herself since Thomas's death. She placed her hand lightly on Vaughn's offered arm, feeling the solid strength beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeve. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. I would appreciate the escort." As they stepped out into the bright Colorado sunshine, Katherine couldn't help but feel that something significant had just occurred, though what it meant, she wasn't yet ready to examine too closely. The spring air was crisp as they walked side by side down Promise Creek's Main Street, Catherine's basket of supplies hanging from Vaughn's free arm. She was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople they passed, but Vaughn seemed entirely unbothered. "You didn't need to do that, Mr. Vance," Katherine said finally, breaking the companionable silence between them. "But I appreciate the gesture." Vaughn's pace slowed slightly as they approached the edge of town where the dirt road began its gentle slope toward Catherine's small ranch. "It wasn't just a gesture, Mrs. Parker. Those women had no right to speak of you that way." His voice was low, touched with controlled anger. "Besides, I meant what I said." Katherine glanced up at him, caught off guard by the sincerity in his storm-gray eyes. "You're very kind, but we both know a woman my age is hardly timeless." He interrupted, the corner of his mouth lifting. "I disagree. Age has little to do with beauty or worth, in my opinion. My mother taught me that. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," he said simply. And Katherine heard the past tense with a pang of recognition that particular sorrow was one she understood all too well. They walked in silence for a few minutes more, the town falling away behind them as Catherine's modest ranch came into view. It wasn't much a small but well-maintained house, a barn, a chicken coop, and about 40 acres of decent grazing land where she kept a small herd of cattle and 2 horses. It had been Thomas's dream, this place, and somehow keeping it running felt like keeping a part of him alive. "How are your cattle faring this spring?" Vaughn asked as they approached the whitewashed gate. "Well enough," Katherine replied. "Though I'm concerned about the condition of my north pasture fence. It's seen better days and I haven't had time to make repairs." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "I have a day off coming this Sunday. I could come by and take a look if you'd permit it." Katherine hesitated. Accepting help from a single man would only feed the town gossip, but the fence truly did need attention, and hiring help wasn't in her budget. "That's very generous, Mr. Vance, but I wouldn't want to impose on your day of rest." "It's no imposition. I find I rest better when my hands are busy." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Katherine noticed a detail she immediately wished she hadn't. "Well, if you're certain, I would be grateful for the help. I could at least offer you Sunday dinner in return." "Now that's an offer I won't refuse. I've heard from the hands at the Rocking M that you make the best apple pie in the territory." Katherine laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been some time since genuine mirth had bubbled up from her chest. "I see my reputation precedes me. I'll be sure to have one ready." They reached her front gate, and Vaughn handed her the basket with a small bow that seemed half playful, half sincere. "Until Sunday, then, Mrs. Parker." "Until Sunday, Mr. Vance." Katherine watched him walk away, hat tipped against the afternoon sun, his stride long and unhurried. Only when he disappeared around the bend in the road did she realize she was still standing at her gate, basket in hand, a strange lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Inside her small but tidy home, Katherine moved through her familiar routine, putting away supplies, checking her bread starter, feeding the chickens that clucked and scratched in the yard. But her mind kept returning to the general store, to Vaughn's unexpected defense, to the phrase that had sent an unwelcome flutter through her chest. "She's timeless to me." Foolishness, she told herself firmly as she pumped water into her kitchen basin. Complete foolishness to read anything into a kind man's polite defense of a neighbor. Vaughn Vance was barely into his 30s, handsome enough to have his pick of the young, unmarried women in Promise Creek. What interest could he possibly have in a widow approaching 40? Still, as the evening shadows lengthened across her small ranch, Katherine found herself planning Sunday's menu with more care than usual and wondering if her blue dress might need pressing before the weekend. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that seemed to promise good things ahead. Katherine had been up since before sunrise, putting the finishing touches on her home, though it was always neat. Today she'd added fresh wildflowers to the table and polished the silver Thomas had inherited from his mother until it gleamed. The apple pie cooled on the windowsill, its cinnamon-scented steam curling into the morning air. A pot of beef stew simmered on the stove, and fresh bread waited to be sliced. Katherine smoothed her hands over the blue calico dress she'd chosen, wondering if perhaps she'd gone to too much trouble for a simple neighborly meal. "It's just gratitude for his help," she murmured to her reflection in the small mirror, tucking a stray strand of honey-brown hair back into place. Nothing more. The sound of hoofbeats approaching pulled her from her thoughts. Through the window, she watched Vaughn ride up on a handsome chestnut gelding, dressed in clean work clothes, his dark hair damp as though recently washed. He'd shaved, she noticed as he dismounted and secured his horse to the hitching post, a detail that sent an unreasonable flutter through her stomach. Katherine opened the door before he could knock, greeting him with what she hoped was a casual smile. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. You're right on time." "Mrs. Parker," he replied, removing his hat. "Something smells wonderful enough to make a man forget about fence repairs entirely," she laughed. "Dinner won't be for a few hours yet. I'm afraid you'll have to earn it first." "Fair enough." His eyes crinkled with that smile again, and Katherine felt something in her chest tighten. She showed him to the north pasture, where several sections of fence had begun to sag, weakened by winter storms and the constant pressure of cattle leaning against the rails. Vaughn assessed the damage with a professional eye, then returned to his horse to retrieve tools from his saddlebags. "You have spare lumber?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves to reveal sun-browned forearms corded with muscle. "In the barn," Katherine nodded. "My husband kept a good supply." They worked together through the morning, Katherine holding boards in place while Vaughn secured them, passing tools when needed, and bringing water when the sun climbed higher. There was an easy rhythm to their collaboration that surprised her, as though they'd been working side by side for years, rather than hours. "You know your way around ranch work better than most women I've met," Vaughn commented as they finished the third section of fence. Katherine wiped a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "Necessity is an excellent teacher. When Thomas died, I had a choice: learn to do everything myself or lose the ranch. And you chose to stay and fight. This place was his dream," she said simply. "And then it became mine too," Vaughn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's how it was with my parents' place up in Montana. My father built it from nothing, and my mother fought like hell to keep it after he was gone." "Is that where you're from, Montana?" Katherine asked, grateful for the chance to learn more about this man who'd come to her defense. "Born and raised," he confirmed, driving another nail into the fence post with practiced efficiency. "Had a small spread near Helena. Nothing fancy, but it was home." "Had." Katherine caught the past tense. A shadow crossed Vaughn's face. "Lost it 2 years ago. Drought killed our crops, then sickness took half our cattle. Banks don't much care about hard luck stories." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly, recognizing the grief in his voice, not just for lost property, but for a lost piece of himself. "Life happens," he shrugged, but the casual gesture couldn't hide the pain in his eyes. "After Mother passed last year, there wasn't much reason to stay and fight for it anyway." Katherine touched his arm lightly, a brief gesture of understanding. "So you came south." "Figured I'd start fresh somewhere new. Colorado seemed as good a place as any." He looked up at the clear blue sky, then across the rolling hills of Katherine's modest ranch. "I'd say I chose well." The warmth in his gaze as it returned to her face made Katherine step back, suddenly conscious of how close they were standing, of the informal ease that had developed between them over the morning's work. "We should break for dinner," she said, brushing dust from her skirt. "You've more than earned it." Vaughn nodded, gathering his tools. "Lead the way, Mrs. Parker." Back at the house, Katherine busied herself with final dinner preparations while Vaughn washed up at the pump outside. When he entered the kitchen, his hair was slicked back from his face, emphasizing the strong lines of his jaw and cheekbones. Katherine motioned him to the table, which she'd set with her best dishes. "This is quite a spread for a simple fence repair," Vaughn said, looking appreciatively at the stew, fresh bread, and pickled vegetables she'd arranged. Katherine poured water into their glasses, fighting a blush. "It's the least I could do. That fence would have taken me a week to fix on my own." They ate with the comfortable conversation of people discovering shared experiences, despite different paths. Vaughn told stories of his childhood in Montana, his father teaching him to track, his mother's fierce determination after being widowed young. Katherine shared memories of her early marriage to Thomas, their journey west from Pennsylvania, the challenges and joys of building the ranch from nothing. "You never had children?" Vaughn asked, then immediately looked contrite. "Forgive me, that's too personal a question." Katherine shook her head. "It's all right. We tried for many years, but it wasn't meant to be. That was difficult, especially for Thomas. He wanted a son to pass the ranch to someday. And you, what did you want?" The question caught her off guard. Few people had ever asked what she wanted, assuming her desires matched her husband's. "I wanted." Katherine paused, realizing she'd never fully articulated it, even to herself. "I wanted a family, yes, but more than that, I wanted a true partnership. Someone to build something with, to face life's challenges beside." She smiled softly. "Thomas and I had that, at least." Vaughn's eyes held hers. "That's rare. Many marriages are more business arrangements than partnerships. Like your parents," he nodded. "They respected each other, but there wasn't much warmth. Not until after Father died, then I saw a different side of Mother. I think she grieved not just his death, but all they might have been if they'd allowed themselves to truly know each other." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as Katherine served the apple pie, still warm with a dollop of fresh cream. Vaughn's expression after the first bite made her laugh out loud. "Good heavens, Mrs. Parker," he said after swallowing. The Rockingham hands didn't exaggerate. "This might be the finest pie I've ever tasted." "Call me Katherine," she said impulsively, then felt her cheeks warm at the pleased surprise in his eyes. "Katherine," he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. "Then you must call me Vaughn." The afternoon light slanted golden through the windows as they finished their meal. Katherine found herself reluctant to see the day end, to return to the polite formality that would surely resume once they left the private space of her home. "There's still one section of fence we didn't get to," Vaughn said as they cleared the dishes together, his sleeves rolled up as he dried each plate she washed. "I could come back next Sunday if you'd allow it." Katherine handed him another plate, careful not to let their fingers touch. "You've already been more than generous with your time." "I've enjoyed it," he said simply. "Your company and your pie are ample payment." She should refuse, Katherine knew. The town gossips would have a field day if Vaughn Vance made a habit of spending his days off at the widow Parker's ranch. But the thought of another Sunday like this one, working side by side, sharing a meal and conversation with someone who seemed to see her, truly see her, was too tempting to resist. "Next Sunday, then," she agreed. "But only if you let me send you home with the rest of this pie." Vaughn's smile was answer enough. True to his word, Vaughn returned the following Sunday and the one after that. What began as fence repairs expanded to other projects around the ranch: a leaking roof patched, a broken wagon wheel replaced, a new chicken coop built to replace the one damaged in the last storm. Each Sunday ended with a shared meal and conversations that grew increasingly personal, increasingly comfortable. Spring warmed into early summer, and Katherine found herself watching the horizon for Vaughn's approach earlier and earlier each Sunday morning. The townspeople had noticed, of course. Katherine endured pointed comments and judgmental stares on her weekly trips to the general store. But something had changed in her. The whispers no longer stung as they once had. On a particularly warm Sunday in June, Katherine and Vaughn sat on her porch after dinner, watching the sun begin its descent behind the distant mountains. A comfortable silence had settled between them, broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle in the pasture or the soft creak of Katherine's rocking chair. "I've been offered a permanent position at the Rockingham," Vaughn said finally, his eyes on the sunset. "Mr. Mackenzie is getting on in years and wants to step back from daily operations. He's asked me to take over as ranch manager." Katherine's heart gave an uncomfortable lurch. "That's wonderful news. Congratulations. It means I'll be staying in Promise Creek." Vaughn turned to look at her, his expression difficult to read in the golden light. "I'd been considering moving on come fall." "Oh." Katherine tried to keep her voice neutral, though the thought of Vaughn leaving sent a cold wave through her chest. "I'm glad you'll be staying then." Another silence fell between them, this one charged with unspoken words. Katherine's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. "There's a social at the church next Saturday," Vaughn said suddenly. "A summer celebration of some sort. I was wondering if you might consider attending. With me." Katherine stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "With you? As my companion for the evening," he clarified, a slight flush visible even in the fading light. "I'd be honored to escort you, Katherine." Her pulse quickened. An informal arrangement to repair fences on a Sunday was one thing, being publicly escorted to a town social was something else entirely. It would be a declaration of sorts, one that would set every tongue in Promise Creek wagging. "Vaughn, she hesitated, searching for the right words. "People will talk. People already talk," he pointed out gently. "Let them. I'm not ashamed to be seen with you." "You should be escorting someone more appropriate," Katherine said, voicing the doubt that had lingered at the edges of their growing friendship. "Someone younger, someone who could give you a family of your own someday." Vaughn leaned forward in his chair, his expression suddenly intense. "Katherine, you think I've been spending every free Sunday here for the past 2 months because I can't think of better company, because I can't." Her breath caught at the earnestness in his voice. "I enjoy your company," he continued. "Your conversation, your strength, your perspective on the world. When I'm with you, I feel at home in a way I haven't since losing my family's ranch." He reached across the space between their chairs, his hand hovering near hers. "I'm not asking for anything beyond your company at a church social, but I would very much like to walk into that gathering with you on my arm." Katherine looked down at his outstretched hand, then back to his face, open, honest, waiting patiently for her answer. Something tight and long knotted began to unravel in her chest. "Yes," she said softly, placing her hand in his. "I would be happy to accompany you." The smile that broke across Vaughn's face was like sunrise, and Katherine knew with sudden certainty that, whether it was wise or not, her heart had already begun to beat a path toward his. The week leading up to the social passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety for Katherine. She spent an entire afternoon altering her best dress, a deep blue silk that Thomas had bought her for their 15th anniversary. It had hung unworn in her wardrobe since his death, but now she took in the waist slightly and added a new lace collar that brightened her complexion. On Saturday evening, Katherine stood before her mirror, examining her reflection with a critical eye. The blue silk complemented her honey-brown hair, which she'd arranged in a more flattering style than her usual practical knot. She'd pinched her cheeks for color and applied a touch of rose-scented oil at her wrists and throat small vanities she'd long since abandoned. "You're being ridiculous," she told her reflection sternly. "It's just a church social." But the flutter in her stomach suggested it was far more than that. The sound of an approaching buggy drew her to the window. Vaughn had insisted on doing things properly, hiring a rig from the livery stable rather than having Katherine meet him at the church. As he helped the driver secure the horses at her hitching post, Katherine caught her breath. He was dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a blue necktie that nearly matched her dress, though they hadn't coordinated. Katherine took a steadying breath and opened her door before Vaughn could knock. The look on his face as he took in her appearance was worth every moment of anxiety. "Katherine," he said, his voice soft with appreciation, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, fighting a blush. "You're quite handsome yourself." Vaughn offered his arm with a small bow that made her laugh, easing some of the tension between them. "Your carriage awaits, madam." The short journey to town was filled with light conversation, but Katherine's nerves returned as they approached the church. Lanterns had been strung around the churchyard, illuminating tables laden with food and a cleared space for dancing. Nearly the entire population of Promise Creek seemed to be in attendance, and Katherine could already see heads turning as their buggy approached, having second thoughts. Vaughn asked quietly, noticing her tense posture. Katherine straightened her shoulders. "No, let them stare if they wish." He smiled, squeezing her hand lightly before helping her down from the buggy. With her arm tucked securely in his, they walked into the social. The immediate hush that fell over the nearest group of townspeople would have been comical if it weren't so uncomfortable. Katherine spotted Mabel Winters, the banker's wife from the general store, leaning close to whisper something to the mayor's wife, both women's eyes wide with barely concealed shock. "Mrs. Parker, Mr. Vance." Pastor Wilson approached them with a genuine smile, seemingly oblivious to the stir their arrival had caused. "How wonderful to see you both. Please, help yourselves to refreshments." Vaughn guided Katherine through the crowd with easy confidence, nodding politely to acquaintances, but never slowing enough for uncomfortable conversations to develop. At the refreshment table, he handed her a cup of punch, his fingers brushing hers intentionally. "Everyone is staring," Katherine murmured, taking a sip to hide her discomfort. "Let them," Vaughn replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "They're just jealous that I have the most beautiful woman at the social on my arm." Before Katherine could respond, the small band in the corner struck up a lively tune. Several couples moved to the dance area, and Vaughn raised an eyebrow in question. "Would you care to dance?" Katherine hesitated. It had been years since she'd danced, not since before Thomas fell ill. "I'm afraid I'm out of practice." "I'll lead," Vaughn promised, taking her empty punch cup and setting it aside. "Trust me." And she did, allowing him to guide her onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, his other hand holding hers with gentle firmness. After a moment of adjustment, they found their rhythm together, moving in perfect synchronization through the lively reel. Katherine's initial self-consciousness faded as they danced, replaced by a joy she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. Vaughn was an excellent dancer, guiding her through turns and steps with confident ease, his eyes never leaving hers. By the second dance, she was laughing freely, caught up in the music and movement and the undeniable pleasure of being in his arms. They danced 3 songs in succession before Katherine needed a break, her cheeks flushed and hair beginning to come loose from its pins. Vaughn led her to a quiet spot beneath one of the oak trees that bordered the churchyard, away from the most curious eyes. "You dance beautifully," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "For someone out of practice." Katherine laughed, fanning herself with her hand. "You're a good partner. You make it easy." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the other dancers, the lantern light casting a golden glow over the gathering. Katherine was aware of whispers and glances in their direction, but for the first time she found she didn't care. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Tonight she felt more alive than she had in years. "Would you like to walk a bit?" Vaughn asked after a while. "It's a beautiful evening." Katherine nodded, and they strolled away from the social, following the path that led around the church and toward the small garden that the pastor's wife maintained. The sounds of the celebration faded slightly, replaced by the evening chorus of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Vaughn asked as they paused beside a rose bush heavy with fragrant blooms. "Very much," Katherine admitted. "More than I expected to. Despite the gossips, despite everything." She turned to face him, emboldened by the shadows and the magical quality of the evening. "Thank you for asking me to come tonight." Vaughn stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and pine that seemed to cling to him. "Katherine, there's something I've been wanting to tell you," her heart quickened. "Yes, these past months getting to know you." He paused, searching for words. "I came to Promise Creek looking for work, not expecting to find connection. But from that first day in the general store, something about you called to me." Katherine held her breath, afraid to hope, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "I know there are those who would say the difference in our ages matters," Vaughn continued, his voice low and earnest. "But to me, you are simply the woman I can't stop thinking about, the woman whose smile I look forward to all week, the woman I want to build something with if you'll allow it." "Vaughn," Katherine whispered, her voice catching. "What are you saying?" He took her hand, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "I'm saying that I care for you, Katherine Parker, deeply, and I'd like your permission to court you properly." The world seemed to still around them, the music from the social, the chirping crickets, even the beating of Katherine's own heart, all suspended in that perfect moment of possibility. "People will talk," she said finally, though the words held none of their former weight. Vaughn smiled, a tender expression that reached all the way to his storm-gray eyes. "Let them. All that matters is what's between us." "And what is between us?" Katherine asked, suddenly needing to hear him name it. "Something rare," he said simply. "Something worth pursuing, regardless of what anyone else might think." In the gentle June night, surrounded by the scent of roses and the distant sounds of celebration, Katherine made a choice. She stepped forward, closing the small distance between them, and placed her free hand lightly on Vaughn's chest. "Yes," she said softly, "you have my permission." The joy that bloomed across his face was like nothing Katherine had ever seen, pure, unguarded happiness that took her breath away. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Vaughn leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. When they returned to the social some time later, Katherine's hand tucked securely in Vaughn's arm and a new light in both their eyes, the stares and whispers seemed entirely inconsequential. What mattered was the future unfolding before them, unexpected, unconventional, and entirely their own. Summer flowed into autumn in Promise Creek, and with each passing week, the town grew accustomed to the sight of Foreman Vance and the widow Parker together. There were still those who disapproved, Of course, Mabel Winters chief among them, but even the most dedicated gossips eventually tire of the same story, especially when the subjects appear entirely unbothered by the attention. For Katherine, the months of Vaughn's courtship were a revelation. He called on her not just on Sundays now, but often on Wednesday evenings as well, bringing small gifts, wildflowers gathered on his ride over, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, once even a kitten from the rocking MTK's latest litter to help with mice in her barn. They attended church together each Sunday, shared meals with the few friends in town who supported their relationship, and spent long evenings on Katherine's porch swing, talking about everything and nothing at all. As autumn's chill deepened, these conversations moved inside to her small parlor, where they would sit before the fire, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes simply enjoying the comfort of shared silence. It was during one such evening in late October, with the first snow of the season dusting the ground outside, that Vaughn brought up the subject of the future. "The rocking M keeps me busy," he said, stoking the fire before returning to his seat beside Katherine on the small sofa. "But I've been thinking lately about my own place again." Katherine felt a small pang of uncertainty. "You're considering moving on after all?" "No," he said quickly, taking her hand. "Not away from Promise Creek. But I've been saving most of my wages, and there's a property coming available east of town, the old Jensen place. It needs work, but the land is good." "You're thinking of buying it?" Katherine asked, trying to understand where this conversation was leading. Vaughn nodded, a slight nervousness visible in the way he ran his thumb across her knuckles. "I've always wanted my own ranch again, but lately I've been thinking that a man needs more than land to make a home." Katherine's heart quickened as he turned to face her more directly, taking both her hands in his. "Katherine, these past months have been the happiest of my life. When I'm with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day in the general store when you held your head high despite those women's cruelty." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. "Vaughn, please, let me finish before my courage fails me," he said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "I know this isn't conventional. I know there are those who will never understand. But I don't want to build a new home, a new life, unless you're beside me as my wife." He slid from the sofa to one knee before her, still holding her hands, his eyes reflecting the firelight and something deeper, something that made Katherine's breath catch. "Katherine Parker, will you marry me? Will you build a new life with me, a new home, a new beginning?" The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, trailing warm paths down her cheeks. For a moment she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in his face, in his words, in her own heart. "Vaughn," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you certain? I'm almost 40. There are younger women who could give you children, who wouldn't bring gossip and judgment down on your head." "I've never been more certain of anything," he said firmly. "I don't want any other woman. I want you, your strength, your kindness, your wisdom. The life I imagine, the home I want to build, it only makes sense with you in it." Katherine looked into his earnest face and saw their possible future reflected, their mornings waking beside each other, evenings by the fire, working side by side to build something lasting. It was a vision so beautiful it almost hurt to contemplate. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I will marry you, Vaughn Vance." The joy that transformed his face was something Katherine knew she would remember until her dying day. He surged up from his kneeling position to gather her in his arms, his kiss far less restrained than their usual careful affection, full of promise and passion and relief. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vaughn pressed his forehead to hers. You've made me the happiest man in Colorado territory." Katherine laughed softly, her hands framing his face. "And I'm the happiest woman, despite what Mabel Winters will have to say about it." "Hang Mabel Winters," Vaughn said with such vehemence that Katherine laughed again. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I almost forgot. This was my mother's. I'd like it to be yours now." Inside the box was a simple gold band with a small sapphire set between two tiny diamonds. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was beautiful, clearly cherished and cared for through the years. "It's perfect," Katherine said as Vaughn slid it onto her finger, surprised to find it fit almost exactly. "Truly perfect." Snow fell more heavily outside the window, but inside Katherine's small parlor, warmth and joy created a shelter against the coming winter and whatever challenges their unconventional engagement might bring. News of their engagement spread through Promise Creek with the speed of a prairie fire. By Sunday morning, when Katherine walked into church with Vaughn's ring glinting on her finger, the pews were already buzzing with speculation and judgment. To Katherine's surprise, however, for every disapproving stare, there seemed to be a genuine smile of congratulation. Pastor Wilson and his wife were among the first to offer their blessing, followed by Edith Sullivan from the general store and several of the Rocking M hands who had come to respect both Vaughn and Miss Katherine, as they called her. "See," Vaughn whispered as they took their seats. "Not everyone in this town is as narrow-minded as Mabel Winters." "I'm beginning to realize that," Katherine replied, squeezing his hand. After the service, as they stood talking with the pastor about possible wedding dates, Katherine noticed a group of women approaching Mabel Winters at their center, looking like a general leading troops into battle. Katherine straightened her spine, preparing for confrontation. "Mrs. Parker," Mabel said, her voice carrying clearly in the church vestibule. "Or should I start practicing Mrs. Vance?" Vaughn's hand tightened protectively around Katherine's waist, but before either of them could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mabel, leave them be." Josephine Miller, the town's no-nonsense midwife and one of its most respected citizens, pushed her way to the front of the group. At 65, she feared no one and spoke her mind freely. "Can't you see they're happy?" Mabel sniffed. "I simply think some consideration should be given to propriety." "Propriety," Josephine snorted. "Was it proper when you married Harold Winters, knowing full well he was courting Sally Jenkins at the time, or when you spread those rumors about the Hendersons that nearly ruined their business?" Several gasps emerged from the gathered crowd. Mabel's face flushed an unbecoming shade of red. "That's entirely different." "No, it isn't," Josephine interrupted firmly. "You just can't stand to see anyone happy if you haven't had a hand in arranging it." She turned to Katherine and Vaughn, her weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "I, for one, am delighted for you both. Love is rare enough in this world without people trying to dictate who deserves it." The murmurs of agreement from several others in the group seemed to deflate Mabel's righteous indignation. With a final huff, she turned and stalked away, her usual followers looking uncertain whether to follow. Josephine winked at Katherine. "Don't you worry about her. She'll find some new scandal to occupy herself with by next Sunday." She patted Vaughn's arm. "You've chosen well, young man. Katherine Parker is worth 10 of most people in this town." "I know it," Vaughn agreed, his voice warm with pride. As they walked home from church, Katherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders, one she hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. "That was unexpected," she admitted. "Josephine Miller defending us so fiercely." "People surprise you sometimes," Vaughn said, helping her over a muddy patch in the road. "Not everyone is bound by convention." "No," Katherine agreed, thinking of the varied reactions they'd received. I suppose not. They decided on a December wedding, small and simple, with only their closest friends in attendance. Katherine would wear a new dress of deep burgundy velvet that she was sewing herself, and afterward they would host a modest celebration at the Rockingham, where Mr. Mackenzie had insisted on providing the finest food and drink his ranch could offer. "He's been like a father to me since I arrived," Vaughn explained when Katherine expressed surprise at the ranch owner's generosity. "Says he's just happy to see me finally showing sense about that Parker woman." As for where they would live after the wedding, that question resolved itself when Mr. Jensen accepted Vaughn's offer on his property in early November. The ranch was smaller than the Rockingham but larger than Katherine's place, with a solidly built house that needed only minor repairs and good grazing land for an expanded herd. "We could sell your ranch," Vaughn suggested as they rode out to inspect their future home together. "Put the money towards stock for the new place." Katherine was silent as they dismounted in front of the Jensen house, her eyes taking in the wide porch, the sturdy walls, the apple trees that would bloom in spring. This could be home. She thought their home, but something in her hesitated at the idea of selling the ranch she'd shared with Thomas. "What if we kept it?" she said finally. "We could hire someone to work it. That young Harmon boy is looking for his first real job, and he's good with cattle. The income would help establish us here, and someday—" She paused, uncertain how to express the thought that had just formed. "Someday?" Vaughn prompted, coming to stand beside her. "Someday it could be a wedding gift to a young couple just starting out," Katherine said softly. "Or—" She hesitated again, then forged ahead. "Or a place for a child to grow into if we were ever blessed with one, or decided to take in one of the many orphans who need homes out here." Vaughn's eyes widened slightly, then softened with understanding and something deeper. "You've thought about children, about us having a family," Katherine nodded, suddenly nervous. "I know it might not be possible for me to bear children at my age, but there are other ways to build a family, if that's something you would want." Vaughn took her hands in his expression so tender it made her heart ache. "Katherine, nothing would make me happier than building a family with you, however it comes to us." The kiss they shared on the porch of what would become their new home sealed more than just their agreement about the ranch. It sealed a vision of their future together, one that expanded with each passing day to include possibilities Katherine had long since stopped allowing herself to imagine. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirl of activity. Katherine divided her time between preparations for the ceremony, setting her own ranch in order for young Jim Harmon to manage, and helping make the Jensen place, soon to be the Vance Ranch, ready for their arrival as husband and wife. By mid-December, Promise Creek was transformed by a heavy snowfall that blanketed the town and surrounding countryside in pristine white. On the morning of their wedding day, Katherine stood at her bedroom window, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered landscape, turning everything to diamond brilliance. A knock at her front door pulled her from her reverie. She wasn't expecting anyone this early. Josephine Miller and Edith Sullivan had promised to come help her dress, but not for several hours yet. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, Katherine went to answer. Vaughn stood on her porch, his breath visible in the cold morning air, a small wrapped package in his hands. "Vaughn," Katherine exclaimed, instinctively stepping back. "You shouldn't be here. It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding." He grinned, keeping his distance but holding out the package. "I know, and I promise I'll go directly after this, but I wanted you to have this before the ceremony." Katherine took the package, curious. "What is it?" "Open it," Vaughn urged, his eyes bright with anticipation. Inside the carefully wrapped paper was a small leather-bound book. Katherine opened it to find blank pages, the paper of excellent quality, with a handwritten inscription on the first page in Vaughn's neat script. For Katherine, to write our story as it unfolds. Every day a new page, every year a new chapter. With all my love, Vaughn. It's beautiful, Katherine said, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Thank you. I noticed you writing sometimes in the evenings, Vaughn explained. You mentioned once that you've kept journals since you were a girl. I thought you might want a new one for our new beginning. Katherine blinked back tears, amazed yet again by how well this man seemed to understand her, to see the parts of herself she rarely showed to others. It's perfect, truly. Vaughn smiled, clearly pleased that his gift had hit its mark. I'll see you at the church then. I'll be the nervous-looking fellow waiting at the altar. I'll be the one in burgundy, Katherine replied with a laugh. He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused, looking back at her with an expression so full of love it took her breath away. Katherine, yes, I can't wait to be your husband. The simple declaration, spoken in the quiet of the snowy morning, stayed with Katherine as she prepared for her wedding day. By the time Josephine and Edith arrived to help her dress, she was filled with a serene certainty that transcended nerves or doubt. The burgundy velvet dress, with its high collar and subtle lace trim, complemented Katherine's coloring perfectly. Josephine arranged her honey-brown hair in an elegant style, woven with small white flowers that stood out against the darker strands. You look radiant, Edith said as they made the final adjustments. Absolutely radiant. It's happiness, Josephine declared with the authority of her many years. Nothing makes a woman more beautiful than being truly loved and truly in love. Mr. Sullivan arrived with his wagon to transport them to the church, carefully helping Katherine navigate the snowy path in her good shoes. The small church was already filled with their friends when they arrived, the rocking hands in their Sunday best. Several families from town who had shown support for their unconventional match. And at the front, beside Pastor Wilson, Vaughn. He turned as the church door opened, and the look on his face as he saw Katherine for the first time in her wedding finery was something she knew she would remember forever. Wonder, joy, and love so clear that even the most hardened skeptic could not have doubted its sincerity. The ceremony itself passed in something of a blur for Katherine. She remembered the warmth of Vaughn's hands holding hers, the steady timbre of his voice as he spoke his vows, the surprising steadiness of her own as she promised to love, honor, and cherish this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly. When Pastor Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, and Vaughn leaned down to seal their union with a kiss, Katherine felt a sense of rightness that went bone deep. This was where she was meant to be, who she was meant to be with, regardless of age or convention or the opinions of others. The celebration at the Rocking afterward was joyous and relaxed. Mr. Mackenzie had spared no expense, providing a feast that would be talked about in Promise Creek for months to come. There was music and dancing, toasts and laughter, and through it all, Vaughn kept Katherine close, his hand finding hers again and again as though reassuring himself that she was really there, really his wife. As evening fell and the celebration continued, Vaughn led Katherine out onto the ranch house's wide porch. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black sky above the snow-covered landscape. "Happy, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, wrapping his arm around her to share warmth. The name still sounded new and wonderful to Katherine's ears. "Completely, Mr. Vance." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I've been thinking about what you said about the possibilities for our old ranch." "Oh," Katherine looked up at him, curious. I like the idea of it being there for the future, whether for children of our own or for someone else who needs a place to start." His voice held a note of thoughtful consideration. "But I was thinking maybe in the meantime, it could serve another purpose." "What sort of purpose?" Vaughn turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the starlight. "There are a lot of women like you, Katherine widows trying to hold onto ranches or farms alone, facing prejudice and practical challenges. What if your place became a sort of training ground? A place where women could learn the skills they need to manage on their own." Katherine stared at him, surprised and moved by the suggestion. "You'd want to do that? Help other women be independent?" "I'd want to help you do it," he clarified. "It was clear from the first time I saw you that you're exceptional, Katherine. You've learned to do things most women never get the chance to try. Why not share that knowledge?" The idea took root in Katherine's mind immediately. She could see it clearly. Women gathering at her old ranch, learning to mend fences, manage cattle, negotiate fair prices for their goods. Women supporting each other, creating a community of strength. "Vaughn Vance," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "just when I think I couldn't possibly love you more, you say something like that." He smiled, pulling her close again. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Katherine confirmed. "A project for spring, perhaps." "For spring," he agreed. "But tonight?" His smile turned more intimate, his eyes darkening with promise. "Tonight is just for us." As they rejoined the celebration, Katherine felt a deep contentment unlike anything she'd experienced before. Her life had taken an unexpected turn when Vaughn Vance walked into Sullivan's general store and declared her timeless. Now, as his wife, she was beginning a new chapter that promised to be richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. Spring came early to Promise Creek that year, melting the winter's snow and bringing new growth to the land. For Katherine and Vaughn, the first months of marriage had been a time of joyful adjustment, learning to share space and decisions, blending their separate lives into one harmonious whole. The Vance Ranch, as the Jensen place was now known, had transformed under their joint care. Vaughn had repaired and expanded the barn, while Katherine had turned her attention to the house, making it warm and inviting with touches from both their previous homes. They'd purchased additional cattle with the profits from Katherine's old ranch, which young Jim Harmon was managing admirably under their guidance. It was on a warm April morning, with wildflowers beginning to dot the prairie, that Katherine sat at the kitchen table with Vaughn, finalizing plans for what they had come to call the Widow's School. "Josephine spread the word through her midwifery contacts," Katherine said, reviewing the list before her. "We have 5 women confirmed to come for the first session in May, 2 from near Denver, 1 from up by Boulder, and 2 from smaller settlements east of here." Vaughn nodded, pride evident in his expression. "And Mackenzie's agreed to let 3 of his more experienced hands help with the training. Says it's the least he can do, considering how much you've improved my disposition." Katherine laughed, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Have I now?" "Apparently I was quite the brooding figure before I met you," Vaughn said with a grin. "Or so Mackenzie claims." "Well, I find that hard to believe," Katherine teased, though in truth, she had noticed a lightness in Vaughn that seemed to grow with each passing month of their marriage. He squeezed her hand, his expression turning more serious. "I'm proud of you, Katherine. What you're building with this school, it's important work." "Our work," she corrected gently. "I couldn't do it without your support." The look Vaughn gave her was so full of love that Katherine felt momentarily breathless. 5 months into their marriage, and still a glance from him could affect her this way, a fact that continually surprised and delighted her. "I should get going," Vaughn said, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Those fence posts won't set themselves, and I promised Jim I'd check on the north pasture at the school property today. Katherine walked him to the door, accepting his kiss with a contentment that never seemed to diminish. "Be home for dinner," she reminded him. "Josephine and the pastor are coming, remember? Wouldn't miss it," Vaughn assured her, stealing one more kiss before settling his hat on his head and heading toward the barn. Katherine watched him go, struck as always by the easy grace of his movements, the breadth of his shoulders beneath his work shirt. At 33, Vaughn was in his prime, strong, vital, filled with plans and energy for their shared future. Turning back to the kitchen, Katherine began preparations for the evening's dinner, humming softly to herself. At nearly 40, she had never felt more alive, more purposeful, more cherished than she did as Vaughn Vance's wife. The whispers in town had largely died down, replaced by a grudging acceptance and, from many, genuine good wishes. Even Mabel Winters had been reduced to tight-lipped civility after the success of the Vances' Christmas gathering, where half the town had witnessed the obvious devotion between the newly married couple. It was difficult to maintain disapproval in the face of such evident happiness. As Katherine worked, a wave of lightheadedness passed over her, forcing her to grip the edge of the counter for support. It passed quickly, but left her concerned. This was the third such episode in the past week, accompanied by a fatigue that seemed to settle into her bones by early afternoon each day. Perhaps she was doing too much, she reasoned. Between establishing the widow's school, maintaining their new ranch, and her regular social obligations in town, she had been pushing herself harder than usual. Vaughn had commented on her pallor just yesterday, suggesting she might want to consult Josephine if she continued feeling unwell. Tonight, Katherine decided. She would speak with Josephine tonight after dinner. The midwife's medical knowledge extended far beyond childbirth, and Katherine trusted her judgment implicitly. The thought of consulting Josephine brought an unexpected flutter of something like hope to Katherine's chest, a possibility so remote she'd barely allowed herself to consider it. But the symptoms, now that she reflected on them more carefully. No, she told herself firmly. Don't build castles in the air. At your age, it's far more likely to be something else entirely. Still, as she continued with her preparations, Katherine couldn't quite suppress the small, persistent spark of wonder that had kindled within her. Dinner that evening was a success, with Pastor Wilson regaling them with tales from his early days as a circuit preacher, and Josephine contributing her own colorful stories from decades of bringing new life into the world. Vaughn was at his most charming, drawing out their guests and ensuring everyone's comfort with the natural hospitality that had surprised Katherine when they first married. As the men retired to the porch with after-dinner coffee, Katherine seized her opportunity, drawing Josephine into the kitchen on the pretext of serving dessert. "I was hoping I might consult you privately," Katherine said once they were alone, "about a health matter." Josephine's shrewd eyes assessed her immediately. "I was wondering when you'd ask. You've been pale as milk these past few weeks, and I noticed you barely touched your dinner tonight." Katherine smiled ruefully. "Not much escapes you, does it?" "Not when it comes to the health of people I care about," Josephine replied matter-of-factly. "Now, tell me your symptoms." Katherine described the dizziness, the fatigue, the subtle changes she'd noticed in her body over the past month. With each detail, Josephine's expression grew more contemplative, until finally she nodded decisively. "I'd need to examine you properly to be certain, but I'd stake my reputation on what's ailing you, Katherine Vance." Katherine's heart seemed to stutter in her chest. "And what would that be?" A smile spread across Josephine's weathered face. "A condition that typically resolves itself in about 7 months' time, bringing considerable joy in its wake. The kitchen seemed to tilt around Katherine. "But I'm nearly 40, she whispered. "After all those years with Thomas, nothing ever." "Life has its own timing," Josephine said gently. "And while it's less common at your age, it's far from impossible, especially—" She hesitated, a twinkle in her eye. "Especially," Katherine prompted. "Especially with a young, healthy husband and the kind of love that fairly radiates from the pair of you." Josephine patted her hand. "I've delivered babies to women older than you, Katherine. It's riskier, yes, but you're strong and healthy. There's no reason to expect anything but a happy outcome." Katherine pressed a hand to her middle, overwhelmed by a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. A child. Their child. Vaughn's and hers, a life they had created together. "You haven't told him your suspicions yet, have you?" Josephine asked, correctly interpreting Katherine's expression. Katherine shook her head. "I didn't want to raise hopes unnecessarily. Especially his. He's never said so directly, but I know he's always wanted children." "Well, come by my place tomorrow for a proper examination, but I'd say it's time to have that conversation." Josephine squeezed her arm encouragingly. "Now, shall we serve that pie before the men come looking for us?" That night, after their guests had departed and the house was quiet save for the familiar creaks of a home settling for the evening, Katherine sat at her dressing table, brushing her hair. In the mirror, she could see Vaughn watching her from their bed, his expression soft with familiar admiration. "You were quiet after Josephine and the pastor left," he observed. "Everything all right?" Katherine set down her brush, turning to face him. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and joy making her hands tremble slightly. "Vaughn," she began, crossing to sit beside him on the edge of the bed. "I need to tell you something." Concern immediately darkened his eyes. "Are you unwell?" "I knew you've been looking tired lately, but I'm not ill," Katherine interrupted, taking his hands in hers. "At least, not in the way you're thinking." She took a deep breath, searching his face. "Vaughn, I believe. That is, Josephine thinks. We're going to have a child." For a moment, Vaughn simply stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then, as her words registered fully, his eyes widened, a look of wonder transforming his features. "A child," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're—" Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat. Vaughn made a sound half-laugh, half-sob and gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his obvious excitement. "Katherine," he murmured against her hair. "My God, Katherine." When he pulled back to look at her, his eyes were wet with unshed tears. "Are you certain?" "I mean, Josephine is certain. She wants me to come for a proper examination tomorrow, but she seemed quite confident." Katherine searched his face anxiously. "Are you happy about this? I know it's unexpected, and at my age there are risks. Happy?" Vaughn interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Katherine, I've never been happier in my life. The thought of having a child with you, of building our family together." He pressed his forehead to hers. "It's everything I could have wished for." Relief and joy washed through Katherine in equal measure. "Even though I'm older, even though some might say—" "I don't give a damn what anyone might say," Vaughn said fiercely. "You're my wife, the woman I love, and now the mother of my child. Nothing else matters." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, a gesture so tender it brought fresh tears to Katherine's eyes. "Our child," he said wonderingly. "Our son or daughter?" "Our future," Katherine added softly, covering his hand with her own. In that moment, with Vaughn's arms around her and the miracle of new life growing within her, Katherine felt a profound sense of completion. The path that had led her here through loss and loneliness, judgment and doubt suddenly seemed perfectly ordained. each step necessary to reach this unexpected joy. Josephine's examination the next day confirmed what they already knew in their hearts. Katherine was approximately 2 months along, with the baby due in late November. Despite the increased risks of a pregnancy at her age, Josephine declared her in excellent health and fully capable of carrying the child to term with proper care and rest. News of the pregnancy spread through Promise Creek with predictable speed. To Katherine's surprise, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Women who had once whispered behind her back now stopped her in town to offer congratulations and advice. Several of the older ranchers' wives organized a quilting circle specifically to create a baby blanket for the coming Vance child. Even Mabel Winters, when confronted with the news at church, managed a tight smile and murmured congratulations, though she couldn't resist adding, "At your age, you'll certainly need all the help you can get with a newborn." "Oh, I don't know about that," Vaughn replied smoothly, his arm protective around Katherine's waist. "My wife has more energy and wisdom than most women half her age. Our child is fortunate indeed." The months that followed were among the happiest of Katherine's life. As her body changed to accommodate their growing child, Vaughn's devotion only deepened. He insisted on taking over the more strenuous ranch chores, hired additional help for the heaviest work, and still found time to assist with the first session of the widow's school, which proved an unqualified success. By August, with Katherine's pregnancy showing prominently, the Vance Ranch had become a center of community activity. The first graduates of the widow's school had spread word of the program, leading to inquiries from as far away as California. 3 of the original 5 women had returned to their homes with new skills and confidence, while 2 had chosen to stay in Promise Creek, taking positions that allowed them to use their newfound abilities. One evening, as summer's heat began to wane and the first hints of autumn touched the aspen trees surrounding their property, Katherine and Vaughn sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and pink. Katherine's head rested comfortably on Vaughn's shoulder, his hand gently stroking her rounded belly. "I've been thinking," Vaughn said, his voice contemplative in the gathering dusk. "About names for the baby." Katherine smiled, placing her hand over his. "Have you now? And what names have caught your fancy?" "Well, if it's a boy, I thought perhaps Thomas, after your first husband." He said it simply, without jealousy or reservation. "He was an important part of your life, and without him, you might never have come to Promise Creek." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes, moved by the generosity of spirit behind the suggestion. That would be a beautiful tribute, Vaughn. Thank you for suggesting it." "And if it's a girl," Vaughn continued, his voice softening further, "I thought maybe Eliza after my mother." "She would have adored you, Katherine, would have been so proud to call you daughter." "Thomas Vance or Eliza Vance," Katherine said, testing the names aloud. "Both sound perfect to me." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear overhead. The baby shifted beneath their joined hands, a strong movement that made them both smile in wonder. "You ever think about how unlikely our meeting was?" Katherine asked after a while. "All the circumstances that had to align for us to find each other." Vaughn considered this, his thumb tracing small circles against her side. "I've always believed that some things are meant to be, Katherine. That doesn't mean they come easily or without challenges, but when it's right." He kissed the top of her head. "When it's right, the universe finds a way to bring it into being. Even when it defies convention. Even when people say it shouldn't be, especially then," Vaughn said firmly. "The best things in life often come from the most unexpected directions." As if in agreement, the baby kicked again, more forcefully this time, causing Katherine to laugh softly. "I think your child agrees with your philosophy." "Our child," Vaughn corrected gently. "Our miracle." October brought a brilliant display of fall colors to the Colorado landscape, and the second session of the Widow's School, which Katherine supervised from a comfortable chair on the porch of her old ranch house. 7 women had come this time, each with her own story of loss and struggle, each determined to learn the skills needed to maintain independence in a world that offered few options for women alone. Katherine found that her own visible pregnancy, far from being a distraction, seemed to inspire the women. Here was living proof that second chances existed, that life could offer unexpected joy even after devastating loss. Several of the women confided that Katherine's example, both in successfully managing her ranch alone and in finding love again, had given them hope for their own futures. As Katherine's November due date approached, Vaughn became increasingly attentive, arranging for Josephine to stay in their guest room for the final week of the pregnancy. The midwife arrived with her usual no-nonsense efficiency, setting up her supplies and immediately taking charge of Katherine's care. "That husband of yours is wound tighter than a watch spring," Josephine commented as she helped Katherine prepare for bed on her first night in residence. "Never seen a man more nervous about becoming a father." Katherine smiled, easing herself carefully onto the edge of the mattress. "He's worried about the risks, I think, because of my age," Josephine snorted. "You're healthier than most women in their 20s, and that baby is positioned perfectly. It'll be a straightforward birth, mark my words." Despite Josephine's reassurances, the night Katherine's labor began 3 days before her estimated due date, Vaughn's anxiety was palpable. He paced outside their bedroom door as Josephine took charge inside, assisted by Edith Sullivan, who had arrived breathless after riding through the night when word was sent to town. Katherine's labor progressed steadily, painful but uncomplicated, just as Josephine had predicted. In the early hours of the morning, as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Eliza Vance announced her arrival with a lusty cry that echoed through the ranch house. "A daughter," Josephine declared triumphantly, placing the swaddled infant in Katherine's arms, "perfect in every way." Tears streamed down Katherine's face as she gazed at her daughter, their daughter with her shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. "She's beautiful," she whispered, tracing a gentle finger along the baby's cheek. "Absolutely beautiful. Shall I send in that nervous wreck of a husband now?" Josephine asked, her gruff tone belied by the moisture in her own eyes. At Katherine's nod, Josephine opened the bedroom door. Vaughn practically fell into the room, his face pale with concern and lack of sleep. When he saw Katherine propped against the pillows, tired but radiant, holding their child, he froze in the doorway, overcome. "Come meet your daughter," Katherine said softly. "Eliza Vance." Vaughn approached the bed with reverent steps, sinking to his knees beside it. His eyes, when they met Katherine's, held such love that it stole her breath. "You did it," he murmured. "You're both all right. We're perfect," Katherine assured him, shifting the bundle in her arms so he could see the tiny face nestled within. "Here, hold your daughter." With visible trepidation, Vaughn accepted the precious bundle, his large hands suddenly impossibly gentle as they cradled their child. The moment Eliza was settled in his arms, something in his expression transformed wonder, joy, and fierce protectiveness, all visible in the way he gazed at his daughter. "Hello, little one," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "I'm your father." As if in response, Eliza's tiny hand escaped the swaddling to wrap around his finger, her grip surprisingly strong for one so small. Vaughn looked up at Katherine, a tear tracking unashamedly down his cheek. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for her, for us." Katherine reached out to touch his face, wiping away the tear with her thumb. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did, for believing I was timeless when I'd started to believe I was past my time." Josephine and Edith quietly slipped from the room, leaving the new family to their private moment of connection. As the sun rose fully over the Colorado plains, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Katherine Vance looked at her husband cradling their newborn daughter and knew with absolute certainty that life's greatest blessings often came disguised as its greatest challenges. What had begun with whispers and judgment in Sullivan's general store had culminated in this perfect moment, a family created against the odds, a love that defied convention, a future bright with possibility. Katherine had never felt younger, more vital, more alive than she did now, at 40 years of age, beginning the newest and most unexpected chapter of her life. In the small journal Vaughn had given her on their wedding day, Katherine had been documenting their journey, the establishment of their ranch, the success of the widow's school, the progress of her pregnancy. That evening, as Vaughn dozed in the chair beside their bed and Eliza slept peacefully in her cradle nearby, Katherine wrote a new entry. "Today our daughter, Eliza Vance, came into the world, bringing with her all the joy and wonder I had once thought lost to me forever. As I watch Vaughn with her, this man who once declared me timeless when others saw only my years, I am reminded that love, true love, sees beyond the surface to the heart beneath. It recognizes possibility where others see limitation and creates beauty from the most unlikely circumstances. Eliza is our miracle, but so too is the life Vaughn and I have built together, a testament to second chances, to following one's heart despite the judgment of others, to the power of love to transform and renew at any age. We are, all of us, timeless in the eyes of those who truly love us. And in that timelessness, we find our greatest strength and our most profound joy." Katherine closed the journal, looking at her sleeping husband and daughter with a heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, whatever whispers might still follow them through Promise Creek, they would face it together, a family forged in unlikely circumstances, bound by a love that transcended age and convention, blessed with a future limited only by the boundaries of their dreams. And in Promise Creek, Colorado, as elsewhere in the vast tapestry of human experience, those who witnessed the Vance's journey could not help but be touched by its simple truth. That love, in its purest form, recognizes no limitations of age or circumstance. It simply sees, embraces, and transforms, rendering both the lover and the beloved in their own unique way, truly timeless.